What is up to all of our fellow Knicks fans? The season starts tomorrow, folks. The Knicks will be facing off against the Boston Celtics. But before that, tonight, me and my two fellow co-hosts, Dylan, to technically my right or left, Dylan Backer of Empire Sports Media and Fireside Knicks. Check out his stuff. I'm pretty sure I posted when I did my posts earlier. Also, a guest who I've been trying to get on for the past couple of months. Also, when we did Boys in the Big Apple. On Big Blue in the Bronx, Geoff Rasmussen of Hot Hand Theory. He is the best at what he does. He and XJ break it down really well on Hot Hand Theory. They're a growing channel, and they're one of the best to talk basketball. So please check out his stuff, Hot Hand Theory, on YouTube and on Twitter as well. If I haven't, I will post the Twitter links in the description. But regardless, I'll start off with Dylan. What are your first thoughts, man?
Right. So first off, thank you for having me on here again. It's nice to be on another stream with you. And about the next season, this first game against Boston, it's going to be a massive test for them right away. Not even just this game, but their coming games after that too. I believe their first 4 games are against teams that were in the postseason last year. So the Knicks, with this high expectations that they have this year, they're going to be put to the test right away. No waiting around for the big matchups. You're going to get right to it, and you're going to get right to it against the defending champions at that on their home floor. So it's a massive test for them right away. I think the guys that I'm most intrigued to watch, though, of course, is the new offseason acquisitions, Bridges and Towns, right? I think those are the two guys I'm going to be watching the most because we all know that, during the preseason, Towns had some decent games, but I think both him and Bridges really struggled shooting, right? Obviously, Bridges had the massive struggle shooting, I think 2 for 19 in the preseason and had that one game where he went 0 for 10. So I think a lot of us are going to be watching that game hoping that Towns and Bridges can fix those shooting woes a little bit. But Boston is also a very good defensive team, so I don't think we can really draw a final conclusion if they don't have the best of nights, but I do think that they need to have really good games if the Knicks want to come out on top. Of course, you have Jalen Brunson, of course, who, I think we all expect to really take over the game and kind of lead the charge, if you will, but you need the other guys to contribute as well. We know that, Precious Achiuwa is now injured, so we're going to be relying on Towns a lot more for not even just this game, but for the few weeks after that. So we're going to need a lot out of him right away. And this game will really be, an early test to see just how well this team matches with the Celtics, because we know that they made these additions in the offseason to do just that, to match up with Boston and kind of be that team that, has the best chance to beat them come playoff time. So I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be an interesting game, but yeah, I'll pass it off to Geoff so he can get his thoughts out.
Geoff?
Yeah, that was an awesome intro for both of us. I hope I live up to it. Those were really nice words, so I appreciate you and appreciate you having me on. I'm really interested to see what the rotations look like with Precious out. I know we're really diving into the nitty-gritty there, but Dylan brought it up. Precious is going to be out for a few weeks, and you saw in the Wizards game, Bridges played the first 14 to 16 minutes of both halves. That was just his normal rotation, and that was with Precious. I think the Knicks really only have 3 wings that Thibodeau is going to trust, and that's Josh Hart, Mikal Bridges, and OG Anunoby. They can't just all play the whole game, obviously, and with all 3 starting, it's going to be interesting to see how Thibodeau mixes them in and out of the lineup, who he replaced them with. Do we see any Pacome Dadier minutes? Does he go with Sims and Huck Porty off the bench together, which would be obviously insane? I don't think he should do that, to be clear. But you never know with Tibbs. He likes his size. He likes his rebounding. He likes his rim protection. I think there are a number of avenues he could go, and I'm interested to talk about that and more stuff with you. But yeah, just right off the bat, getting the Celtics, getting the defending champs, I don't think it's really a show me game. If the Knicks don't come to play, or that they lose handily, I think the Celtics have the continuity on their side. I think the Knicks are trying to infuse Towns and Bridges, as Dylan just said. So can they win this game? Yes, I think they can, of course, but I think building the chemistry and getting the Knicks to where we feel like, oh, this is a championship team, that's going to take some time, and I think Knicks fans need to make peace with that.
Absolutely great intros by both. Yeah, this is going to be quite the exciting season. I'd say it's the most exciting season, the most anticipated season for Knicks fans, I'd say probably the last 20 years. Obviously, think about those late 90s teams, the early 90s teams, the 2010 teams. Okay, they had 3 years in a row, but you know what? We're finally building off a sustained success as an organization. This team is going all in. They have the pieces, everything seems so organized. It's not just like an all in push for the sake of all in push and just names. There's finally a foundation, there's finally a culture of winning, and it's time for the Knicks to make that next step. And obviously, it's a big year for Tom Thibodeau as well, because you could argue that this is his most talented roster, and he has his guys now. So obviously, now he has to go up against a stacked East. You obviously have the Indiana Pacers who are coming back. They beat us in the Eastern Conference semifinals. You have the Philadelphia 76ers who made some moves in the offseason, including getting Paul George. You also have the defending champion Boston Celtics who are coming back for more. So it's gonna be interesting, obviously, but I'm definitely excited to talk about the Knicks. It's an anticipated season, as Dylan said, and Geoff just said as well, and also that the Knicks face a gauntlet a little bit. So it's going to be a bit of a challenge. I don't think I'm going to panic, as Geoff was just saying. I'm not going to panic if they lose tomorrow, but it would be nice to see a win to get off to the fast start. But to start off, obviously talking about last season, 50 wins and a second seed. The Knicks made it to the Eastern Conference semifinals, lasting till Game 7 with numerous injuries. I'm going to start with, we're going to do a small segment on this, not too big. Dylan, was last year successful, and do you think that thrusted the Knicks into going all in as an NBA final contender?
Yeah, I do think last year was successful. I mean, given the circumstances that they were faced with, throughout towards the end of the season and into the postseason, I mean, pushing the Pacers to 7 games with like basically 6 players available and all your best players injured, it's a good season. I think a lot of us would have wished that they made the conference finals. I know I would have too. I mean, you were up 2-0 in the series against Indiana. You had a chance to go up 3-0. Of course, the heave by Nembhard completely changed that series. It flipped the script, and of course, so did OG's injury, right? But regardless of that, the Knicks weren't going to beat Boston. I'm just being honest. They were not going to beat Boston. They were not prepared to beat Boston with the guys they had. And maybe if they were healthy, they could have pushed them to 6, but I'd still think Boston was the better team. I think now with the additions that they made in the offseason, they match up with them significantly better, right? You have Bridges and Anunoby together, 2 guys that can stop Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Of course, you're still going to get their buckets. They're 2 superstars, right? But those guys are also all NBA level defenders, all defense level. So those guys are going to be able to, for the most part, prevent those guys from taking over. Now, of course, Boston's going to definitely game plan that, and they're definitely going to look to get mismatches and switches off of that all game. I'm fully expecting that. But regardless of that, I think the Knicks have a good combination of high-level scoring and defense to be able to, beat the Celtics, not even just in this regular season game, but looking way ahead and into the postseason if they match up. I think they are capable of doing that. Of course, there's depth issues. You don't have Dante DiVincenzo anymore. You lack some bench depth a little bit. Of course, some guys are now injured already before the season even began. As we mentioned, Achua was already hurt, and Landry Shamet got hurt and then got waived, which, I expect Shamet to be back at some point. But regardless of that, he's no longer with the team at the moment, so we can't really talk about him. So the bench is thin. The rotation's thin. And of course, I'm saying all this without even mentioning Mitchell Robinson's injury, who's going to be out until 2025. Another important piece that brings size and defense, right? Now, when they have all these pieces together, I think we'll have a really good idea of what the rotations are all going to look like together. Who knows? Maybe Josh Hart's role looks different because, we all know he kind of has been questioning his role lately. Scored, I think, 2 total points in the preseason, which, we're not asking him to score, but I think when you have the other scorers around you, you at least want him to be somewhat of a threat to score so it takes the attention off of the other guys and it doesn't allow them to just double team whoever has the ball. So you want Hart to be able to kind of be a little expansive and score a little bit, but I'm not expecting him to put up 30 a game. But regardless of that, just looking at the way the roster is built right now, I think this is one of the best Knicks teams really ever on paper. Of course, we got to see how it plays out on the court before I can go ahead and be like, yeah, this is one of the best of all time. Yeah, of course. But, looking at it on paper, this is one of the best Knicks teams that really in the history of the franchise. It is. You have 2 all-stars, 2, all NBA level players. You have an MVP candidate in Brunson. You have all defense level players with Bridges and Anunoby. And of course, Robinson too, when he's healthy, is an all defense level player. And you have good bench players in McBride, a veteran in Cameron Payne. Precious Achiuwa is a growing player. You have a very well-rounded team. This is one of the best Knicks teams really that has a chance to win the title. Now, and the luxury too is they don't have to win the title this year. Yes, I would love for them to do that. I think the expectation is to get that far, but you have this core tied together for the next at least 3 to 4 years. You have them together. And because of Brunson taking that, pay cut, you have the ability to still add. Yes, you're close to being a second apron team and you might need to move some other contracts, but you can keep your star players while adding. And I think that's most important. You have this window of about 3 to 4 years to get it done. And that's why it's not championship or bust this year. You want to make the conference finals. I think that's like the next step for them, oddly enough. Yes, I know a lot of people want them to make the NBA finals, and I want them to as well as a fan, but I think the next step is to make the conference finals because they've still yet to do that since 1999. So you need to be able to get there, and then the next step, of course, is make the NBA finals, whether it's this season or the season after that. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Geoff.
The only thing I'd say to that is I feel like a common misconception amongst NBA fans is that team progress is linear. And that is true sometimes. Sometimes it's just you make stage A and then you make stage B and then you get to the top. We saw it on an individual level with two of the greatest of all time in Jordan and LeBron. Jordan needed to beat the Pistons and then he won his championships. LeBron needed to get over Detroit and then he needed to get past Boston and he did those things and then he won his championships. But sometimes on a team level, you just kind of have to take advantage of the moment when it's available to you because you really never know what the league's going to turn into down the line. You don't know who's going to end up where. Giannis was talking about how he could be traded if Milwaukee doesn't win the championship this year. What if Giannis gets traded somewhere that just creates this formidable opponent that, the Knicks have a much worse chance of beating than they have of beating Boston this season? So I agree with Dylan that they are set up to sustain success for the next few seasons. I think that's inarguable. And I also agree that it's not championship or bust. It's definitely not championship or bust. But that doesn't mean that the Knicks shouldn't be looking at this season in terms of how can we maximize our chances of winning a championship? Because they do have a chance of winning a championship this season. And so when we go back to last season, I think it would be silly to look at some of the injuries that the Knicks sustained, whether it's Julius Randle, OG Anunoby, and say, oh, like Tibbs ran him into the ground. I think that's, a talking point that gets pushed around a lot. And I think it's naive, to be honest, like not because Tibbs doesn't play his guys a lot of minutes, but because there's more nuance to the conversation. Sometimes it is his fault. Sometimes it's not his fault. It's not 100-0. It's not just this binary thing. And so when we're talking about last season, whether it's a success, I thought Dylan made a great point. Unequivocally a success. They got to the point where they were at. They were very handcuffed and shorthanded, and they still fought and pushed a game 7. Could have won a game 7, but they just ran out of gas. But I think the question you want to ask is, did they make the decisions they made after the injuries happened looking at a championship? Or did they make the decisions they made trying to maximize the short term? I think a championship team maybe would have been a little bit more risk averse with the guys they did have left available, like Josh Hart and OG Anunoby when he came back from injury. Isaiah Hartenstein after Mitchell Robinson went down. Everybody talked about how Isaiah Hartenstein's defense was not great against Philly, and then he was just hit or miss against Indiana. But if you look at his minutes, the second Mitchell Robinson goes down, he's playing 35, 40 minutes a night, and that stuff just adds up in the long run to the point where if you're trying to win a championship, maybe you don't make those decisions. Maybe you say, okay, we're going to lose a little bit here in these January games, but where we're going to make them back is these playoff matchups where our best players are maximized. So I don't think it would be fair to begrudge Thibodeau for the major injuries, but I do think from an organizational standpoint, thinking about the macro, you really have to look at this team and think this is a championship team and we have to make all our decisions with that singular goal in mind. We're trying to win a championship this year, even though, to Dylan's point, they are built to contend for a championship the next 3 or 4 years. You just never know what could happen. So you can't say, oh, it doesn't matter if maybe we're making our guys slightly more likely to be tired at the end, or maybe Josh Hart is slightly more likely to get injured because he's playing 42 minutes a night until Precious Achiuwa gets back. Because who knows what's going to happen next offseason. The truth of the matter is this season they can go get it. And so to make the season a success, I don't think they have to win a championship, but I think they want to look back and think we did everything we could to put ourselves in a position to win a championship.
And before Luca makes his point, I just want to, quickly interject and add to that and, say, like, I think a successful season is, did they take the next step? did they make progress and go forward, or did they take a step back despite making all these moves that, on paper makes you look like you went forward? You added Towns, you added Bridges, you completely shook up the roster, right? And whether they decided to do that because of all the injuries last year and they saw that, hey, we can still compete by, flipping this roster around, getting rid of guys like Randall and still competing and making other additions and stuff like that. I don't know. I obviously don't know the thought process behind all that. I'm still processing the fact that the trades even happened in the first place. But, regardless of that, I think, just to add on to what Geoff said, the main goal really, or like not goal, but like the main idea here to really determine if it's successful is if you took a step forward. If you went forward, then I think you can consider it a success. And for me, going forward is at least making the conference finals. And yes, I agree. The NBA changes a lot, and you don't know what other teams are going to add next offseason. We don't know what the Knicks are going to do next offseason. Who knows if some of the guys that are here right now are even on the team at the trade deadline? You never know at this point anymore, especially with Leon Rose quickly just deciding, oh, I'm going to pull the trigger right now and make these trades. Like, I don't think anyone thought Randall was going to get traded when he did. Nobody expected Quickly and RJ to go when they did. So anything could happen. One blink of an eye, we become contenders, and another blink of an eye, this other team becomes better than us all of a sudden. So yeah, I mean, I agree. You kind of want to be able to go for it right now, but I do think at the same time, it's so hard to win a championship that you got to be able to at least take steps forward to be sure you can get to that point. That's all I really wanted to say, though. I want to get Luca an opportunity to talk about that.
Yeah, it's all good, Dylan. But yeah, I agree. I think last year's season was definitely a success. Obviously, making past the first round in the consecutive year for like the first time since '99, 2000, I believe. So you really showed stability, as I mentioned in the open. But Geoff is absolutely right. Show us that for this season to be a success, whether it's making the conference finals or the finals. Obviously, that's the idea, to make the finals during this stretch and obviously win one at least. Show that you're maximizing all your resources and show that you're really trying to win. Don't pull any punches. Obviously, you want to look at the risks and look at the benefits, or look at all the advantages, disadvantages. The idea is to win a championship, but you got to do it smartly. You can't be like, oh, we'll win a championship one year, then we'll have no assets for the next year. So that's obviously a discussion point. I really do think it was successful last season. But so the next segment that I have here is we're going to break down the individual transactions. Then we'll move into Tom Thibodeau. So first off, I'm going in chronological order here. Transaction number one, that was trading for Mikal Bridges. The Knicks traded actually, I was in Europe when I was woken up at like 4 a.m. in European time when this happened. The Knicks traded for Mikal Bridges. They sent over Bogdanovich, Mamadi Diakite, 5 first-round picks, first-round pick swap, second-round pick, and Shake Milton. Not really much of assets outside of the first-round picks, but regardless, Geoff, you watch more of the NBA than I'd say me and Dylan combined. You do the NBA podcast. Like, what does Mikal Bridges bring to the table? Obviously, we discussed a little bit before, but like, what's the full breakdown look like, Geoff?
So what I find interesting about the trade is the Knicks are going to be kind of looking to combine the two players Bridges was in Phoenix and Brooklyn. So you had this version of Mikal Bridges, who in Phoenix was the third option off of Chris Paul and Devin Booker. He was mostly a catch and shoot shooter. He shot 40% one year in Phoenix, and that was basically his main role. He was a 3-and-D guy, and then he went to Brooklyn, and they were like, let's see if he can scale up. Let's see if we can take this guy who in his role is a very, very high impact player. Let's see if we can add usage to it and see if he can become, the first or the second option. It didn't work, but I think it's natural for Bridges to grow certain parts of his game as he's trying to do that. So what would those things be? Mostly things you're doing off the bounce, attacking closeouts, just initiating offense. I think what the Knicks are looking at in Bridges is they're looking for him to return to his role in Phoenix. They're looking for him to be a second or third option in these lineups with Brunson. And he's going to mostly, be shooting off the catch, attacking closeouts. But they're hoping that with his newfound skill set that he got in Brooklyn, he's kind of sharpened the edges a little bit, and he's going to be more efficient attacking these closeouts. And he can carry over the initiating offense skills he learned when he's leading the bench unit. So, look, I know people are getting really, really worried about these small sample shooting numbers that we saw in the preseason, the shooting form. I'm not a shot doctor. I'd never claim to be. The guy has consistently been good at shooting for his entire NBA career. I'm not saying don't panic about the form. There are people who are way smarter than me who are breaking down the form who are saying this doesn't look good, this hinges, whatever. I'm just saying let's let it play out over a greater sample size before we're really dissecting that part of it. Let's let him struggle for a couple months before it's like, all right, maybe he's just not the shooter he was. And I do have to say, if he's going to take this role, this 3-and-D role off Jalen Brunson, and we're trying to create maximum space, if you take away the shooting, that's a big loss. Like he's here to make shots. And it's not going to be one of those things where it's like with Josh Hart, where Tibbs is going to get in press conferences and say, well, you can impact wins without scoring. No, I mean, Mikal Bridges is here to score. They gave up Julius Randle. I know they got Karl Anthony Towns back, but Jalen Brunson and Karl Anthony Towns can't score all the points. They scored 1.3 points per possession in the pick and roll on Brunson Towns pick and rolls in the preseason. They can't do that for 70 possessions a game. Other people have to fill in somehow. Bridges is going to be counted on to score in a way that Josh Hart isn't. So, yes, it would be nice if he brought the defense they had in Phoenix. But at the end of the day, he does have to shoot. They are relying on him to shoot, and I think we're going to see some of that. I think we're going to see secondary creation. And I'm not going to make any prognostications about how good he's going to be, but I do think that's the role they want him to fill. They want him to shoot off of Brunson. They're not going to ask him to do too much initiating when Brunson's on the court. That's going to be saved for when Brunson's sitting and Bridges is leading the bench unit. And I think that they got him at the right time because, as I alluded to, he learned those skills in Brooklyn. Was the overall team offense in Brooklyn good? No, it wasn't. But Bridges grew as a playmaker himself, and I do think it is made for a bench-type role in the right circumstance.
Right.
Real quick, Dylan, I just want to get something real quick. As Alex says, if you haven't already, guys, hit the like buttons, comment, and subscribe. Turn on post notifications so you know when I go live or a video drops. We are 28 subscribers away from 100, so please check out my recent shorts. I did some injury updates as well, and some of my other videos. I think I recapped the first Charlotte Knicks preseason game. What's up to Jacob, by the way? But Dylan, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, no, you're good, man. It's your show. It's not mine. But I just wanted to, add to what he said. I'm really glad you brought up the thing about Bridges running the second unit, because I think that that's going to give him the opportunity to really use that skill set that he learned in Brooklyn, right? Obviously, you already mentioned it, but, he was mostly just a catch and shoot guy, third option on Phoenix, and then as a Brooklyn net, he was the number one option, which, of course, was something Bridges had never been before, really, ever, until he became a Brooklyn net, and he really learned a lot of skills, as you said, as a top option. He was a top scoring option. He averaged like over 26 a game in the first 27 games with Brooklyn. Of course, that didn't last. His numbers took a decline in his second season with them, but that's to be expected. I don't think anyone expected Bridges to really replicate that same exact production again for a full season. I didn't think it was realistic, and I hope anyone else didn't also think that was realistic. But regardless of that, he learned a lot of skills, as you said, as a good playmaker, a shooter, a finisher, and of course, he's still got the defense. And now that he has less offensive responsibility on the Knicks, he's going to be able to focus on the defense more, which I think is very important, especially when you're playing alongside Anunoby. I think that's really important because, like I've been saying, the whole point of getting Bridges, of course, you want him to score. This guy's a guy who's been, 15 plus point per game scorer for his, most of his career. You want him to be able to score the basketball, of course. But at the same time, you also have him because he's that good of a defender. He's an all NBA level defender. I believe he was all NBA first team in 2022. So you have, or defense first team, all NBA defense first team. So regardless of that, he, can kind of get back to that form a little bit with the Knicks. He can be able to, reach that same all defense level form by having less offensive responsibility, because we've seen guys that take on more responsibility offensively and their defense takes a dip, which is exactly what happened to Bridges. He was still an effective defender in Brooklyn, but he definitely wasn't the same type of defender that he was in Phoenix because he had so much to do offensively, right? Now that he's able to exert more energy on that end of the floor, being that he's like the third option now in the Knicks playing alongside Brunson and Towns, he's going to be able to get back to that form, and doing that alongside Anunoby is going to make them a really tough defensive unit. They were already a really good defensive team last season before you brought in Bridges. Now that you just added him and you have good defensive pieces around him, and he doesn't have to take on such responsibility offensively, the sky's the limit again defensively. He could even have his best defensive season for all I know. That's combined with playing under Tom Thibodeau, who emphasizes defense, as we all know very well. So with all that being said, he can really have his best defensive season. He can be a defensive player of the year candidate along with Anunoby, which, of course, on paper, we already know that they're probably one of the best, if not the best, wing defensive duos in the league, but we got to see how it plays out on the court. But I have no reason to believe it won't play out very well. Of course, there's the offensive concerns, as you mentioned, with the change in his jump shot. I'm not gonna, freak out because it was the preseason, so I'm not gonna, panic yet. But I, will at least acknowledge that the jumper is much different. I don't know how I feel about him making such a change to his jumper when he's been such an efficient shooter for his career. I do trust him. I trust him to make the proper adjustments given how well his track record is shooting. But at the same time, I kind of wish, he wasn't constantly making changes so much to really, because I saw the quote, he said he was trying to get back to his Villanova form, which is fine. If you want to get back to what you were back then when you were comfortable with that, I get it. You got to make the adjustments. But at the same time, you don't want to tinker with something that is working. I always say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And Bridges' jumper has not been broke. It's been, a very effective shot for most of his career. He's a career 37% three-point shooter. So me personally, I'm not the biggest fan of the fact that he changed his jumper or that it looks a little different. I'm not going to fully judge yet because we haven't seen it play out in the regular season. Of course, it was, pretty dreadful in the preseason, of course, as we've all, said by now. But still, I will hold off on the full-on opinion with the shooting until I see it in the regular season. But other than that, I think the defense is what's going to be really important. I know you were talking about the offensive creation a lot, which is all very good points, of course, and I think that that's very true. But at the same time, I think they really, really were emphasizing the need for the defense because they know that Brunson can take over games. They know they have another all-star scorer alongside him who can also take over games. And of course, they can't, as you said, they can't do all the scoring. I think everyone knows that. They can't do it all. You got to get, an additional 15 points from Anunoby or Bridges and, split up the scoring with the bench unit, all that stuff. You got to be able to get all that stuff if you want to win games consistently. But they also know that Brunson is basically the engine to the team and that it is basically his team now. And they know he's going to be the guy to go to in late game situations. So you have Bridges for the defense. You have him for, to stop the other team's best scorers alongside Anunoby and stop them from taking over games so that we can let our guys take over. I think that's really what it came down to with Bridges. So, yeah.
I just wanted to add some data to what Dylan and I are talking about when we talk about how important role is to how impactful somebody can be. When Bridges was in Phoenix, he shot his last two seasons in Phoenix. He shot 76% and 77% at the rim, which put him in the 97th and 99th percentile. And then he went to Brooklyn, and that number dipped to 64 and 58%, which was league average and then well below league average. But then at the same time, his mid-range efficiency, 47 and 48% in Phoenix, only went down to 45 and 42%. You look at those numbers, and what you gauge from them is that he went from a place where his rim attempts and his mid-range attempts were a lot easier because they were coming off other players' creation and there was more space for him to shoot these shots because everybody remember those Phoenix teams, they made the finals. There was all that space. Ayton was the only one who ever rolled to the rim. Other than Ayton, they had shooters like Cameron Johnson, Jay Crowder, Chris Paul, Devin Booker. So Bridges was only ever shooting these shots at the rim when they were pretty much open and when he was attacking closeouts or fast break shots. Then he goes to Brooklyn. There's much less space. There's much less creation. He has to carry that burden. But the fact that the rim number went down so much and the mid-range only went down a little bit, what it tells you is that the rim number probably went down so much because of the lack of space, whereas the mid-range maintained what it was because he grew as an initiator or as a creator of shots from that range. So this goes back to the point of the Knicks are hoping that they can return him to his Phoenix profile, give him more space, let him play off the catch, attack closeouts like he's used to, but carry over that skill that he's gained in Brooklyn. And I think you could see potentially, if the shot is still there, one of his most impactful offensive seasons ever. But again, the shot has to be there. That's a big part of it.
Absolutely, the shot has to be there. And again, as you guys were saying, I'm neither a shot doctor as you guys are. He's got to get comfortable with the shot. Preseason's there to work out your kinks and all that. You have 5 games, 4 games. Preseason's there to work out his kinks with his shooting, his new shooting form. I'm not going to panic. First couple games, maybe I'll panic a little bit, but overall, I'm not going to really panic. I'm going to give him some time. Fair enough. And as Dylan brought up at the end of his point, that Bridges, as the skills you guys mentioned that he picked up in Brooklyn with the self-creation and creating for others, like he can do that, but he's not going to have the best defensive player on him. That's going to be either Jalen Brunson or Karl Anthony Towns, which is the best part out of all of this. And obviously that's going to maximize Bridges as a player. He's going to continue to grow, even though he's been in the league for a couple of years. So that's a great thing. And what a lot of people misunderstand about this whole trade, and it's not really Knicks fans, it's other NBA fans, maybe it's just the Net fans too, is like, oh, well, you traded this many picks for a role player. And I'm like, no, that's not the case, because his shot, as Geoff just brought up with his rim statistics, lack of spacing in Brooklyn, a lot of pressure on him as an offensive creator because he was the main option. And obviously defense is bearing down compared to Phoenix, where mainly defenses were focusing on Chris Paul, DeAndre Ayton, and Devin Booker. And now he was more of a defensive role player in Phoenix, and you're like, oh, his defense sucked in Brooklyn because, again, he had the most pressure offensively and really couldn't focus on defense. So now it's, as Geoff said, it's going to be a hybrid of those skill sets, and that's a beautiful thing to have as your third option. Like Anunoby doesn't help to have the self-creation, which is fine. That's probably why he's the fourth option in that starting lineup, and I'm completely cool with that. And I'm also completely cool with Mikal Bridges running the bench unit. And even before Dante DiVincenzo got traded, people were having that discussion. So I'm not completely against that. I'm not complaining about Bridges at all. I'm going to give him time with his jump shot, as I said earlier. But just some other statistics. I was looking at B-Ball Index. They're really good with this stuff. In terms of his overall impact, then I'll break out into the defense and offense. Clutch probability added. He was 7th out of the top 10, I believe, in forwards, which was higher than Jalen Williams, Jonathan Kuminga, and Franz Wagner. He shot 49% in the clutch. And another thing, I'm not sure if you guys mentioned it, second in forward minutes played, and he played in all 82 games last year. And I don't think he's missed a game throughout his entire NBA career.
Yeah, he's never missed a game in his career.
Hasn't missed a game since high school, actually. So.
That's absolutely big because, we're worried about OG Anunoby. Obviously, we'll get to him in a second. But just to have durable players and, obviously, is he going to be durable for 82 games? I don't know. But just to have somebody as durable as Mikal Bridges, durability, as they say, availability is the best ability. Availability is the best ability. I think that's what they say. But defense, you look into B-Ball Index, perimeter isolation defensive percentile, 86.4, very good. He was also graded with a perimeter isolation defensive grade, got an A in there. Also, he in his forward matchup difficulty rating, he was rated 8th in terms of defense. And in terms of offense, his shot location versatility, where he can get to on the floor, ranked 5th in the NBA out of guards, and it was also ahead of Kevin Durant and Paul George. Catch and shoot field goals this past season, 38.4. That can only go up. Left corner threes, 39%. Right corner threes, 41%. Above the break, 35.9%. 66.7 on cutting layups. 55.6% on layups. 62.1 field goal percentage in the restricted area. That's only going to get better. Mid-range, 40.8%. And as we said, his ideal role is being a guard stopper and also a point attack defender, and also as well his self-creation and being that lead creator of that bench unit. Now, I'm going to ask you guys this. Do you guys think he has a swing factor, or do you think we've discussed that already with his creation and his improvement there?
Right. I mean, as an offensive creator, I think we're going to see a lot of Bridges' offensive creation in the second unit. I think that's where you're going to see it the most, right? Because when he's with the starting five, you're not going to take the ball out of Jalen Brunson's hand. You're not going to take the ball out of Karl Anthony Towns' hand. You're not going to do that, right? There's a reason why Josh Hart barely even scored, right? Because you have Bridges and Anunoby as the secondary scoring options alongside Brunson and Towns, right? But like I just mentioned too, you're not going to take the ball out of their hands. You're going to let them do the offense. So Bridges' offensive creation, you're going to see a lot of that in the second unit, and I really think that's a plus too to have because, yes, our bench unit is very thin, but you have the capability to put Bridges right in there alongside the guys. He's got length, he's got some size to him, even though he's like, more of a guard. He's still able to, guard most positions and also, like I just mentioned, create offensively. And you're going to be seeing that a lot with the bench unit. As a matter of fact, I think he could even be leading the bench unit. You might, of course, you're going to probably be seeing guys like, Miles McBride being the first guy to come off the bench and stuff like that. That's what I at least expect. But I think when the full bench unit is out there, Bridges will be that fifth player. He'll be that guy from the starting five that is out there running it with them. and he's going to be the main facilitator. He's going to be the main creator offensively. He's going to be the one creating the looks for, McBride or Payne or Chua when he's out there, and other players like that are up there, with him on the bench unit. Maybe you even see Anunoby out there with him. Maybe you see Hart out there with him, with the bench unit, I'm saying. You might even see all different types of rotations, really. And I think that's a luxury that Tom Thibodeau has. He has, a lot of flexibility here. Yes, he's got kind of got a thin rotation at the moment with the injuries that occurred to Achua and Shamit, of course. You're already kind of challenged a little bit, but you have the players that are flexible and can play different types of roles at any given time. Josh Hart could even play off the bench too and run that bench unit. It's not just Bridges. You have flexible options, right? So I think that's what makes Bridges so valuable, though, is that he's able to be, a top defender with the starting five, while also being a top scoring option and creator with the bench unit, which is a big plus in my opinion. I mean, I think that's really what makes him valuable here.
And I agree with everything Dylan said, so I'm not going to speak more about just say the same thing he did. But if I might, this whole using role player in a negative connotation, as far as anybody who can't create their own shot or can't be the best primary creator on a championship team, like, oh, he's a role player, that's archaic analysis, and that needs to stop. The Celtics just won a championship with arguably their two most important players in the playoffs being quote unquote role players by this definition. Derek White lapped the team in EPM during that playoff run. He was inarguably their best player during that playoff run. In this day and age, the breadth of talent is so wide throughout the league. You can't have a team that doesn't have these really good role players. So therefore their value is as high as it's ever been. So saying that someone like Mikal Bridges isn't worth what the Knicks gave up for him because quote unquote he's a role player is missing the forest for the trees, because if the Knicks are going to win a championship, they need players like Bridges, especially on the contract he's on now. They need players like OG Anunoby. People think the Knicks overpaid OG Anunoby, but you look at any of the on-off data, any of the impact data from last year, you could make the argument that he was the team's most important player last year. Every single lineup that he was in just absolutely obliterated teams. People say, oh, that January Knicks team when they had Randall and OG. I don't mean this as disrespect to to Julius Randle. They looked like that after Julius Randle got hurt. They just needed OG Anunoby on the court. They had a lineup that was second of all qualifying lineups in the entire NBA. The lineup of Jalen Brunson, Deuce McBride, Dante DiVincenzo, Josh Hart, and Isaiah Hartenstein. What is that? That's 4 role players in Jalen Brunson. This just goes to show that role players in the right role, for lack of a better word, if the synergy is there and the role players are good enough, that it can be enough. So I just think we need to stop with, oh, he's just a role player. Role players can be incredibly valuable. They can't be top 5 players in the league, but you don't have to be a classic, oh, I can create my own shot and get my own bucket to be extremely valuable in today's NBA.
Yeah, it also factors in with the little things as well. But as Geoff was just talking about, our next guy is actually going to be OG Anunoby, who the Knicks re-signed right after trading for Mikal Bridges. Re-signed on a 5-year, $212 million contract. A lot of fans were happy about it, just the overall impact of Anunoby. I believe it was like the first 21 games the Knicks played with Anunoby. They were 18-3 with him. It's not even just the on and off data, as Geoff just mentioned. It's just the record. Like, he was so important to that team in so many aspects. But I'm going to start with Dylan in terms of OG Anunoby, what he brings to this team. Like, obviously, the contract is a bit, a lot of people are talking, $42 million, he's injured, this, and the third. Obviously, in my opinion, his swing factor is his health and staying on the floor. But I also think the Knicks have wing depth behind him as to why they drafted, like, a decent amount of wings. They obviously have, and not that they're going to be ready to play now in terms of, like, oh, my God, this guy's going to be a star after OG Anunoby gets hurt. Like, they still have Pacome Dadier. They still have Kevin McCullough. Now they're going to spend time, obviously. But I think that what's an underrated thing about the Knicks, what the Knicks have done this offseason is that they've taken the back end of the bench a little more seriously because they saw the injuries go down last year. So, Dylan, your thoughts on OG Anunoby, obviously what he can bring. I have the statistics and numbers, but I'll let you go first, and then I'll have Geoff go.
Right. This is a perfect segue because it kind of goes into the role player thing we were just talking about with Bridges. You trade for guys. You trade a lot of assets for a guy like Bridges, and you sign Anunoby to a big contract, not just because of the numbers they put up. You do it because of fit and their impact on the court. OG Anunoby, as you mentioned, when OG Anunoby was out there, the Knicks looked unstoppable at times. They were beating teams by 20 plus points, good teams at that, not just like beating up the Wizards left and right. They were beating, the Sixers, the Wolves, the Nuggets. They were blowing these teams out when OG was out there. And the numbers, of course, tell all that. The record tells all that. I believe they were like 26-6 or something like that when you include the postseason when he was out there, and they were 31-32, including before the trade when he wasn't out there. He makes a massive difference, and I think the swing factor, and I agree with Luca on this, it's health. He has to stay healthy, and we know he's got an extensive injury history a little bit. We know he's, missed a lot of time most seasons. I don't think he's really even played a full season really ever. I think, the closest he's been to it has been like, one of the few years he was with the Raptors. But other than that, he's got to stay healthy because we don't have a lot of depth behind him at the four. You have Achua, who's kind of like the backup 4/5, right? But that's kind of it, because then after that you get into like your Jericho Sims and Ariel Hukporti, who both have promise and can be impactful, but this team's trying to win a title, and you really don't want to have to rely on guys like that to really provide an impact when they've kind of not really done that. Hukporti, of course, is a rookie, so I'll give him benefit of doubt, but we're entering the fourth year of Sims, and we haven't really seen any crazy impact, despite the fact that he has gotten opportunity. Of course, he hasn't played a ton of minutes over his career, but he has made 32 starts. So he has gotten the opportunity to really kind of be an impactful center. And I know he has some good things to his game. He's got some good elements. He's a good rebounder. He's switchable on defense. He's able to guard multiple positions. That's good. But there are other things, like offensively, he doesn't provide much at all really whatsoever, other than being a lob threat, which, I know that's mostly what Mitchell Robinson is, but Mitchell Robinson also gets you those offensive rebounds. So that's the difference between those two guys, right? Jericho Sims doesn't exactly have that same kind of impact on the offensive glass. On the defensive glass, he's great, but you get my point. I think you guys get the point I'm making. With OG Anunoby, though, I don't want to, stray too far away from him. With OG, he's just got to be able to stay healthy, because you need the scoring, of course. You need him to be able to be out there and be another scoring option as the four. But the defensive impact he provides is just too important. It is. I mean, we saw it in the preseason. That the Knicks shot the ball horribly in their final preseason game against the Wizards, but OG Anunoby was everywhere defensively, and is the reason it was a close game. It's just true. And again, I know it's preseason. I'm not like looking at preseason numbers and making conclusions, but that's just an example, because we've seen him do it already in the regular season and in the postseason. We've seen him have that impact already. You can look at the playoffs against Philadelphia when he was healthy and he was out there, and look how good the defense was in late game situations. Getting those clutch steals, making plays. That all that stuff is important. Of course, him as an offensive player, you need the scoring, you need the 3-point shooting, one of the better catch and shoot 3-point shooters in the league, really. And he's, an underrated finisher. I'll give him that too. Honestly, I hadn't seen much of OG Anunoby other than, a few Raptors games before he got traded to the Knicks. Watching him play, though, I realized just how big he is, and how, underrated of a finisher he can be when he, is able to attack downhill, which is good. You want to have a guy like that who's, willing to put their body out there on both sides of the floor. Now, of course, that exertion of energy is probably what leads to so many injuries for him, because he's putting so much on the defensive end while also trying to be a capable scorer. So I can understand that. But now that you have, two guys in Brunson and Towns who are both all NBA level scorers, both have, now at least one season of averaging at least 25 a game. Both of them now have that under their belt in their career. And we know that, Brunson's scoring average can probably only go up from here with the enhanced spacing. OG he just makes such a difference on the court when he's out there in so many different ways, in other ways than just, the obvious lockdown defender. He provides the floor spacing with the ability to shoot, the finishing that he's got. He's underrated on the glass too. He's gotten some good, games with some high rebound numbers. So there's a lot to him. He just needs to stay healthy. I'm not worried about necessarily his on-court impact. I already know he's going to provide a massive impact on the court. Like I'm fully confident in that. I don't think I'm really worried about him taking a step back anywhere. He just needs to stay healthy. That is the only thing that really will stop him from having an impact this season and in the seasons beyond that.
Yeah, I'm really glad you took that perspective because, we agree again with everything you said about just how good he is and how well-rounded he is, all the areas you talked about. And this goes back to what I said at the start of the show about how the Knicks need to make decisions that have the overall ceiling in mind. OG Anunoby is integral to the overall ceiling. You can't even risk him not being healthy in the playoffs. All spoiler alert, any Knicks fan, if OG Anunoby is not 100% in the playoffs, they're not winning a championship. This team might be built around Towns and Brunson, but OG Anunoby is closer to that tier than anybody else on the Knicks. And honestly, he is important in a more unique way than Brunson and Towns are. You can make the argument that one of them goes down. Yeah, it would stink. They would probably be screwed too, but at least the scoring, one of them could maybe make up for it, or maybe there are areas they could. You lose OG Anunoby, you're losing the whole house of cards comes down. And so, we talk about rotations. I question what the rotations are going to be. I think it is in Tom Thibodeau's nature to look when lineups aren't doing well to say, well, I want who's going to give me the best chance of winning to be out there. And I think that's totally reasonable. It's his head coach, it's his job. If they don't do well, he might lose his job. So I think that's a totally reasonable perspective to have. But if he knows that that is his bias and that's how he thinks, I think he needs to look at a guy like OG Anunoby and say, well, if he's not out there, who do I want out there? And we all know what the answer is. It's Josh Hart. Josh Hart is the the worst OG Anunoby that he would be happy to have out there if OG
Great
Anunoby's on the
value,
court.
OG Anunoby.
This is why, in my opinion, Josh Hart shouldn't start, because I think that it is easier to create a wing rotation that Tom Thibodeau will be happy with if Josh Hart comes off the bench. When OG Anunoby isn't on the floor, you put Josh Hart in. When Mikal Bridges isn't on the floor, you pair him with OG Anunoby. Josh Hart is the most versatile player on the team. The best way to emphasize that versatility and keep Tom Thibodeau happy is to bring him off the bench so that the majority of those 96 small forward and power forward minutes go to the three guys that Tom Thibodeau will be most pleased with having in those roles. Because what I guarantee is going to happen with Hart, Bridges, and OG Anunoby all in the starting lineup, he's going to have to look elsewhere. They can't all three just play 48 minutes. I understand staggering exists. Tom Thibodeau doesn't stagger. He runs a very, very simple ABA rotation. You start the game, then you come off the bench, you play your bench shift, and then you go out. You never play multiple shifts off the bench if you're a Tom Thibodeau bench player. This makes it extremely hard to stagger or to diversify rotations with his teams. So what's going to end up happening is one of two things. Either he's going to go deep into the bench while Precious Achiuwa is out and play guys like Luca mentioned earlier, like Pacome Dadier, TJ Warren, Kevin McCullers. He's going to be very unhappy with those minutes in the short term. That is very likely. And he's going to rush guys like OG Anunoby and Mikal Bridges and Josh Hart back into the game. All of a sudden, they're playing 39, 40 minutes a game because Thibodeau needs the best guys out there all the time. You play 39, 40 minutes a game over from the start of the season all the way through the season, you're reducing the chances that your guys are peaking in April and May. Josh Hart comes off the bench. It is much more feasible for Tom Thibodeau to play OG Anunoby 34, 33 minutes a game because all of a sudden Hart is the one filling those minutes. We know he's going to be satisfied with Hart's production, whether he's scoring 2 points or 15 points, because Hart does give you all those little things. So to me, that is the answer insofar as making sure the Knicks give themselves the best chance of approaching their championship ceiling. You got to give Thibodeau a chance of being okay with the non-Bridges OG wing minutes. Because if he's not okay with those minutes, he's just going to go back to Bridges and OG. That's what he's going to do. They're his comfort people. We've seen it with Luol Deng. We've seen it with Jimmy Butler. Those wings, those two-way wings, he loves those guys. And so if the Knicks want OG and Bridges to be healthy and to be somewhat rested when the playoffs come around, they need to make sure that as many of the non-OG, non-Bridges minutes are being played by Josh Hart. And I think that the best way to achieve that is to bring Hart off the bench.
Exactly as well. And I'm going to go into what Geoff was leaving off with when it comes to Hart off the bench before I get to Anunoby. I also think we were also talking about this in the pre-show or the early on, that Hart also gives defenses way to leave their worst defender on him because he doesn't look to score. And we talked about how he was basically talking about being lost in the role he was in the preseason, how he basically wasn't really synergizing with the guys in the starting lineup. In my opinion, you need a guy like Deuce out there who's looking to score. Obviously, he's a good defender as well. That helps out, but you need a guy who's looking to score, who's looking to cut, who's looking to attack. Deuce added a 3-point shot last season. That got way better. He also added a pull-up mid-range jumper. So Deuce's ability to score, let alone, I think should put him in the starting lineup. Not to try to take away push, or I should say scoring punch from the bench, where obviously you have Josh Hart, you'll have Mikal Bridges running the bench unit. Maybe you could have Deuce in some of those minutes as well. But again, as Geoff was just saying, if you really want to maximize the OG Anunoby Bridges minutes by keeping them healthy, keeping Tibbs happy, you leave Josh Hart on the bench. And now to get into Anunoby, some of the grades from B-Ball Index, he was ranked 6th in perimeter isolation defense with an A+, similar to Mikal Bridges we discussed earlier. 2nd in passing lane defense. We already know about his length and his way to disrupt passing lanes. 8th in defensive matchup difficulty. And on offense as well, he's top 5 in stable transition points per possession. Catch and shoot threes. He's one of the best at that, 40.2%. One of the best from the corners, 46.3% from the left corner last year. Right corner, 40.7%, 32.1% above the break. He doesn't shoot a lot of those, to be fair. Mid-range jumper, 46.8. I got to tell you, I got a big kick out of it last year towards the end of the season. Whenever, this was in the playoffs too, whenever OG Anunoby would go around a screen, he pulls up for the mid-range jumper, and he does that weird thing with his leg, that little herky-jerk movement. Yeah, it's like, it was almost kind of like, yeah, I know I'm going to make this, so I'm going to make it. It was my way of OG telling
Weird,
me
because
that
when I see
I made
players
the
do
mid-range
hops, I
jump
think
shot.
they missed it.
Yeah, but go back to the mid-range game. We discussed that restricted area. That's only going to get higher with the spacing. As I said, ideal role, cutter and a corner shooter, and also a versatile defensive forward. Obviously more impact than that. And we said his swing factor is his health. So the next acquisition, obviously of recent, earlier this month, was Karl Anthony Towns. Now, there was a bit of divide in the Knicks fan base regarding this transaction, not only in terms of Towns. He got the bad rap that he was soft and all this and that, doesn't play defense. He obviously had a very conflicted relationship with Tom Thibodeau in their ending in Minnesota. Obviously, it's been years since Towns has played with Tom Thibodeau, and it seemed like they were getting along in the regular season, but it also, what has made Knicks fans a little still conflicted about this, I don't know, I think Dylan might feel a little conflicted about this, I'll let him explain himself, was losing Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo, I'd say more than Randle. And I don't know who described it perfectly. I don't remember who it was, but it was a perfect thing, because Towns was looked at the way Julius Randle was looked at in New York. Most people liked him, but there was fans that were conflicted on him in terms of defensive effort, his play style and all that, turnovers and all that. And it's like we traded, each other's kind of confounding player, should I say. They're both very talented. There's no lying there. Towns is a better three-point shooter, which we'll obviously get to, and he adds so many wrinkles, but obviously Julius Randle letting DiVincenzo go. A lot of people are a little more sentimental because Randle had been here for years. So, Dylan, I'm going to let you explain your thoughts first, and then we'll head back to Geoff. But what were your thoughts? We can also add in, what was your initial reaction to this trade when you got the
I'm
notification?
glad you asked, because I was literally just going to say that. The initial reaction was shock, big time shock. When I saw that the Knicks were acquiring Towns, one of the first things I actually said was, please don't tell me you included Randle, because I'm a big Randle fan. I have 2 of his jerseys hanging in my closet. I'm really big Julius Randle fan, so I was, a little heartbroken once I found out that he was a part of the deal. On the emotional side, I was like, this kind of sucks. I really didn't want to get rid of Randle. And of course, I had been someone in the past who had been saying to not get Karl Anthony Towns for a myriad of reasons. And I wasn't exactly on the whole, oh, he's soft. I wasn't a part of that train. I just, from a basketball standpoint, I wasn't sure how I felt about it. But that was, of course, before we got OG Anunoby and before we got Mikal Bridges. And then, when I really think about it now and looking at it from a roster standpoint, I do think having Towns is a better fit alongside Brunson than Randle. And I think the biggest reason why is because we're no longer going to be seeing Brunson and Randall kind of fight for shots, if you will, fighting for the opportunity to be like the leading number one option, if you will, because we kind of saw that from time to time where they kind of would be taking turns, kind of just like, all right, this is my turn. This is where I'm going to try to score and take over, which, it's fine. There are teams that have done that and it's been fine. But I think ultimately the Knicks chose a direction here, right? They made it clear this is Brunson's team now. They're not, deciding between whether it's Randall or Brunson's team. Yes, Randall was here for, I think, 4 or 5 years. He basically turned around the team. He's basically the sole reason why we are even in the position to make win now moves. So, all credit to Julius Randle, all respect. I will, always respect him. I always, root for him in Minnesota and stuff like that. I'm one of his biggest fans, to be honest with you. He made me love the Knicks again because just of how good he was doing, in the years, in of course, that 2021 season and beyond that. Even after the down season in 22, I said he was going to bounce back big now that Brunson was here, and he did. He did both times. I was really hurt when he got injured last year. It felt like I got hurt too because I was like, no way, this is, one of my favorite players, and now he's going to be out for a while. And then when I found out he wasn't going to be available for the playoffs, it really hurt because I really wanted him to kind of end that narrative of him being a bad playoff performer. I mean, it's not even necessarily just a narrative. It is true. He's a bad playoff performer. But I thought, I was hoping that this would be the time that he would end that. Now that you had Anunoby here and, of course, Brunson having his best season, I was really looking forward to him getting that opportunity to, be a good playoff performer and help the Knicks get to where they want to be, which would have been last year a conference finals appearance at the very least, So when the trade happened, of course, I had my mixed emotions about it, but looking at it from a more rational standpoint, emotions aside, thinking about it from a basketball perspective, I think it was the right move. It was a tough move to make. I mean, as Tom Thibodeau said himself, you have to give up good players to get good players, right? So, of course, it came at a big cost. It came at a cost of Randall and DiVincenzo, two guys who were very impactful for the Knicks last year. I mean, you saw once Randall went down, they had to make so many different adjustments. And yes, as Geoff had said before, they still had good success when Randall was gone, when OG was on the floor. Of course, when OG was off the floor, it made such a big difference. So, I understand that there's that perspective as well, but I do Julius Randle still made a difference for the Knicks. I do. I just think it gave them that secondary all-star scorer, all NBA level player that any championship team really honestly needs, unless you're the Denver Nuggets, I guess. But other than that, you had that, right? And then when he was gone, you didn't have it. So now that he's gone and you replaced him with another all-star, which is the good thing about it. You replaced Randall with another all-star. You didn't replace Randall with some scraps or some stopgap replacement. No, you replaced him with another all-star, which is good. Yes, maybe getting rid of DiVincenzo was a tough loss, but me personally, I don't think it's as big of a loss as some have made it seem. I think it's more on the emotional side of things. I think that we have the players capable in the second unit to kind of replace that production a little bit, most notably Deuce McBride. I think he's most capable of kind of replacing that production a little bit, maybe not to the same scale, but DiVincenzo wasn't going to get the same shot opportunities that he got last season once we brought in Bridges. It's just a fact he wasn't. It was kind of weird what his role would look like off the bench because he's good enough to start, but there's just no spot for him to start necessarily, right? So all that being said, I mean, it was a tough trade. It's a tough business move. The NBA is a very tough business. I'm sure a lot of fans on both sides of the trade were probably feeling a little bit sad about it. Yeah, there was Minnesota fans who didn't exactly love Towns either, but there was a lot of Wolves fans who loved him. I think most of the, uh, anger, I guess, if you will, from Wolves fans comes towards Rudy Gobert in that front court. That's the issue there in the front court, why it wasn't working, not necessarily Karl-Anthony Towns. Towns was with the team for 9 years. He was a big part of why they made the Western Conference Finals last year for the first time since the Kevin Garnett days. He's been an all NBA level player for pretty much his entire career, 20 plus point per game scorer, career 40% shooter from three. I mean, this guy's been an unreal player. Yes, he's had his ups and downs, and yes, there's the defensive concerns, but he also was willing to play power forward when he didn't necessarily have to commit to that because he'd been playing center his entire career, but he was willing to make the change for the betterment of the team. They ultimately made the Western Conference Finals, and maybe it's not necessarily because of you moved Towns to the floor, but I think the point still stands that he was willing to make a change in order to hopefully make the team better, and that goes a long way. Because when you get traded to a new team, sometimes you might get tasked with having a new role. Towns is clearly the starting center on this team, which is a defined role, which is a good thing to always have. That's why the Jalen Brunson signing has been so good, because he had a defined role when he came here. He wasn't fighting with like Luca Doncic to be, getting ball handling duties. He was the starting point guard once he came to the Knicks. So Towns, he's the starting center now that he's with the Knicks. That's a very clear role. He has a clear offensive role too as the number 2 option, a pick and roll duo with Brunson. I think it's going to work out better than would have with Randle. And I loved Randle as much as I did, and I really thought that the Knicks could have done something still with Julius Randle. But I think in terms of looking at where for the ceiling of this team to make the NBA Finals and of course win the NBA Finals, I think you have a better chance of doing that with Towns and the rest of this roster that we've built around him and Brunson, of course, than you would have with Randle. And that's not even trying to disrespect Julius Randle. Like I just said, he's one of my favorite players. I loved watching him play. I have 2 of his jerseys, as I said earlier. I was really upset when he was gone, but I think from a basketball standpoint, it's the right move. It's a tough move, but it is the right one.
I thought it was really interesting that you brought up the creation aspect for Julius and then the roles, because I think that is the point of this trade. And I thought you nailed it. I thought all your Julius analysis were really good. But I think what the Knicks and Timberwolves did is they kind of flip-flopped what they were trying to emphasize. I think the Timberwolves thought they needed more creation next to Anthony Edwards.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Brunson's a little bit ahead of Edwards in that department. And I think the Knicks were more willing to go with a more heliocentric look where Brunson carries the bulk of the usage, and they're going to use Towns for spacing and to, be interactive with Brunson. I, for one, will be upset's the wrong word, but I'll be disappointed if they use Towns like they used Randle. I don't want to see him, being a 1B and getting a flurry of these elbow touches where he's asked to self-create. He's not the self-creator that Julius is. That's the one distinct advantage that Julius has over Karl Anthony Towns. But to Dylan's point, what Towns does that Julius doesn't is he's more willing. He's a better, more viable option at center. So it already gives the Knicks more space by sliding him to center and sliding OG Anunoby to power forward, as opposed to needing a true center next to Julius Randle like Mitchell Robinson or Isaiah Hartenstein when they had. You're already capping your space by having Julius Randle as your power forward, unless you can find a rare spacing center like Brook Lopez or Miles Turner, but those just don't grow on trees. And that's what you're bringing in when you bring in Karl Anthony Towns. So my initial reaction to the trade was just trying to analyze what each side was thinking, and I like it from the Knicks standpoint. I think they raised their championship ceiling. I thought it was. I'm a little higher on DiVincenzo, assuming unless you just don't think that he can replicate what he did last season. We covered it over at High Hand Theory. I'm not sure people realize just how good a shooting season DiVincenzo had last year. He was one of 5 players in NBA history to make over 6 threes per 100 possessions, and he did so shooting 40%. So he was high volume, high efficiency, which is remarkably rare. He did so, by the way, both of those things, high volume, high efficiency, 15th percentile in shot quality. He was near the bottom of the league in shot quality. He was shooting anything he could once Julius Randle went out, because besides Jalen Brunson, they didn't have an offense. It was Jalen Brunson create offense, maybe some Isaiah Hartenstein at the top of the key. Besides that, those 2 options, Dante DiVincenzo chucking a 28-footer was what they had. So if that is the real Dante DiVincenzo, he's a 40% three-point shooter on really tough quality, high-volume shots. That's a big loss unless Bridges can, shoot better than he did in the preseason. The jury's still out on that. But even despite all those things, even despite losing a great player in Julius Randle and a great player in Dante DiVincenzo, Karl Anthony Towns overhauls the system entirely and allows you to do things that you simply couldn't do with Julius Randle. You go and you get a Karl Anthony Towns and you allow yourself to change the way you play. You change the fundamental foundation of the team. I think their overall championship ceiling in this window with Jalen Brunson was raised. So I concluded that I was, more happy than sad when the trade was made, even though you do, want to give someone like Julius Randle, who was here for the toughest years and helped turn the ship around, you want to make sure he gets his flowers.
Right, and before
Yeah,
Luca, does I quickly just want to, add an additional point to it too. Bringing in Towns too gives the Knicks a center that can shoot, a five that can shoot specifically, something that they've been looking for forever. I mean, yes, they briefly had Kristaps Porzingis, but they mostly used him at power forward anyway. But even aside from that, they have like never really had a shooting center. Of course, their best centers. He's not the best center the Knicks have ever had because they've obviously had Patrick Ewing and Willis Reed and obviously guys like that. But besides the point, Towns is something unique for the Knicks in that he's a lights out shooter, possibly even the greatest shooting big man ever. And that's maybe sounds crazy because it's Karl Anthony Towns I'm attaching that to, but it's true if you look at the data and the numbers. No center really ever shoots 40% from three for their lifetime across 9 seasons. That's like unheard of, right? So, it gives the Knicks a whole new dynamic, as Geoff was saying. It allows them to play much more freely as well. The spacing is going to be ridiculous once all their guys really figure out their roles and where they're supposed to be on the court, because they're obviously still trying to figure it all out. The trade hasn't even been a month old. It was literally these guys were getting ready for training camp with their respective teams, and then boom, massive trade. They got to go completely different places across the country. So it's a whole different thing, brand new dynamic though, but I think ultimately it's going to make the Knicks a lot better. I think the playoffs really showed last year that they can trust Brunson to be that main engine of the offense. When he was just taking over those games left and right, when the Knicks would struggle, he would come out there and just absolutely light up the opposing team and really put the Knicks in a great position to win games. I mean, they pushed a Pacers team to 7 with 6 available players. And it really, honestly, only took Jalen Brunson's hand breaking for it to all fall apart. I mean, obviously, Anunoby's injuries when it really started to stale a little bit, but it completely finished out once Brunson's hand was broken and you literally had nothing left. You knew at that point that it was done, right? But even when he was out there, you felt like you still had a lasting chance just because he's that capable of taking over games. And adding in Towns is only going to allow him to do that even more because now he no longer has a big man clogging the paint, which is where Brunson operates the best inside the arc. So that's my just additional point I wanted to make. But I want to give Luca the opportunity to hop in on that.
absolutely. And I'm going to list my initial reaction to the trade. I was actually on my brother's bed. I was actually doing an apps assignment for a certain class. I get the notification from Ian Begley that Karl Anthony Towns being traded to the Knicks. I throw my headset and I say, what? But all seriousness, looking at the trade, all in all, right? And I'm going to bring up Geoff's co-host XJ because I saw a bit of this segment on Twitter, and XJ actually said that he had the best on-off stats of his career when he was playing center, especially with Tom Thibodeau. I think that was like the 2016-17 or 2017-18 season. Like he had ridiculous numbers with his on-off data, and Towns obviously maximized that team. He's going to maximize this team. And I think a big problem Jalen Brunson had in the playoffs and towards the end of the season last year without Julius Randle was he was shooting a lot of contested three-point shots. Now that Towns is a guy you could do pick and pops with, you could add all these little wrinkles in. Brunson's going to get a lot of open shots. So is Anunoby. It's basically freeing up a lot of open shots for others. And Towns, looking at some of his efficient numbers, I obviously, Dylan, you're a baseball fan. You look at OPS plus, right? Obviously, it works the same for like free throw plus, field goal plus, 3-point plus. It's 100 is above, 100 is average. Anything above that is above average. Like you look at Julius Randle stats, are like 90, 95, 96. Karl Anthony Towns, 110, 120, 115, 105. And I'm like, wow, I didn't even know he was this efficient. So you got to obviously look, emotional, sentimental part. I respect Julius Randle. I thank him for what he's done. Same thing for DiVincenzo. You separate the emotional part and you look at what Towns is able to do offensively. It's just opening new horizons for this offense and what they can do, and they could possibly.
And something I really want to say too, I think a lot of us, maybe including myself, underrated Towns a little bit. Towns is a great player. I mean, he is. The numbers do not lie. Yes, he's not the most perfect player. He's not, something like that you look at and just are completely wowed with every single time. But he's underrated. This guy is a very good player, and it maybe there's the whole debate that people were having of whether or not he truly is better than Julius Randle from an individual standpoint. But I think from a fit standpoint, Towns makes more sense for this Knicks team. Now, as for the Wolves, I don't know. I honestly don't know how I feel about a Randall and Rudy Gobert front court. That's very interesting to me. I wonder if Anthony Edwards is going to get mad when 2 weeks go by and he still hasn't dunked the ball again. So, that should be interesting to see. But in terms of the Knicks, just overall, I think we need to realize that Towns is actually a really good player and that overall this fit's going to be good for the Knicks. Like, obviously, it might take some time. There's going to be some growing pains. There's going to be some nights where Towns is an off night and we're going to be like, oh, why did we trade Randall for this guy? Why did we trade DiVincenzo for this guy? It's going to work out, I think. I think it's going to work out. I'm confident that it is. I think it just needs to give time for, him and Brunson to develop the chemistry in the pick and roll and the pick and pop, because they can be one of the best duos, if not the best duo, in that department in the NBA. They have the capability to do that. So, yeah.
And not only is the team going to benefit from Towns, obviously shooting aspect, and I was just looking at some of his grades. Let me see if I got the grades up. I do from B-Ball Index. Playmaking talent, grade A. Three-point shooting talent, given an A. Off-ball shot making, second among forwards. Pass creation quality. And also, I don't know who brought this up, but it was a very good point. In a certain way, he also kind of replaces Isaiah Hartenstein, what he's able to do. So it's kind of like you're replacing two
Underrated
players at once.
passing, and
But
he's improved defensively.
absolutely. And he's also a very good free throw shooter. Finally, we have a big man who can shoot not only from three, but from the free throw line when you need to. Half court shot making, obviously fourth among forwards. Catch and shoot 3-pointers, 38.4, 42.9 from the left and right corners, but he's mostly an above the break guy, 41.8%. And also, I think as well, I don't now, Geoff, I could be wrong. I don't think that Towns has ever had as versatile as defender as OG Anunoby. Maybe McDaniels is maybe just as versatile, but from a defensive aspect, Towns is obviously going to get better. He brings the rebounds. I don't think he's had like two pairs of defenders with Bridges and Anunoby, and just how to look at how versatile Anunoby is. That's going to be a big help defensively.
Well, that's just such a really good point, honestly, because the thing about Towns that's scary about playing center, it's the reason he moved to power forward and they traded for Gobert, is they didn't love his rim protection, which is, first of all, strange. It just, you look at Towns, you look at how skilled he is, how big he is. It just seems like he should be a good rim protector. He was a fine rim protector at Kentucky. I'm not sure why opponents are so successful at the rim against him, but that's neither here nor there. It's the truth. Opponents are successful at the rim when he's the primary defender. But your point is so good, because maybe the Timberwolves don't force a trade for Gobert if at the time Towns was playing center, they had Mikal Bridges and OG Anunoby on the wing. That's why they're so valuable there, is because they do allow Towns to play center and maybe make it more viable on the defensive end. Are they going to be the league's best defense? Probably not. But if you have Towns and Jalen Brunson as your point guard and center, and you've surrounded them with shooting, the threshold for how good your defense needs to be is lower. It does not need to be the best defense in the league, because you're going to have a top 3 offense if you run it the right way. You have a top 3 offense, you really only need to be a top 10, maybe even top 15 defense. And I think you have Hart, Deuce, Bridges, OG Anunoby at the point of attack. And like you said, OG Anunoby, when he's not guarding a Jason Tatum, he'll be on that back line, and his job will be to help protect the rim. So that's just such a good point by you, because this could be the best chance Towns has ever had to be his best offensive self while also simultaneously not completely tanking the defense.
Absolutely. And I was just going to bring up one point, but I'm not sure what it was. It slipped my mind actually. But yeah, Towns is definitely going to grow with this team. And now I know what my point was. And when I initially looked at this trade, I was looking at the advantages, Towns, disadvantages. And as you said, Geoff, the biggest advantage that Randall has over Towns is the shot creation aspect. I'm like, yeah, we kind of lose shot creation with Towns, but you know what? As you said, it's a heliocentric aspect around Jalen Brunson, and he doesn't need, as Dylan was saying as well, to just combine the 2 points. He doesn't need another shot creator to just share the ball with. If they can run these pick and pop actions, pick and roll, where Towns is a factor off the ball, he doesn't need the ball in his hands to succeed constantly. He's one of the better off-ball players there is. So at the end of the day, yes, you lose shot creation, but that's not what the Knicks are aiming for, as you said, Geoff. Now the Timberwolves are adding Julius Randle, another shot creator along Edwards, because their shooting wasn't as good, obviously, down the stretch stretch in the playoffs, and McDaniels wasn't exactly reliable, but regardless, it's just a great find for the Knicks. And if you really look into the statistics, you go away from the emotion, it's all good. And I think this will work out. He'll have some rough games, but I also think in terms of the toughness aspect, I think Towns obviously is a native tri-state area guy. He was born in Piscataway, New Jersey, grew up a Yankee fan. He knows about the New York market. I think he's going to get toughened up here. But also I wanted to include as well, we're going to move off the transaction aspect. We're going to move to our head coach, and that's Tom Thibodeau. He was extended for 3 years this past offseason. I'm going to start with Geoff, Dylan, and then I'll go to myself for our thoughts on Thibodeau being extended. Is he the coach to take us to the promised land? And what new wrinkles can he add? And what has he done well to, should I say, adapt to the modern game? Because that was a big criticism of him originally being the Knicks coach. He couldn't adapt.
So I think the jury's still out on whether Tibbs can be the guy to lead them to the promised land. I think that he's done everything he can to satiate and reinforce the idea that he's good for the reasons he's good. Like, he's clearly a good head coach. He clearly raises a team's floor higher than maybe any coach in the NBA. If Tom Thibodeau is your coach, he's going to instill certain principles that'll make sure that the guys out there, they're defending. And you asked the question about how he's adapted to modern basketball. Tom Thibodeau teams have some of the best shot maps in the entire NBA. He loves corner threes. He loves shots at the rim. He loves free throws. Those are statistically the 3 most efficient areas on the court, and they are what Tom Thibodeau emphasizes. There are very few players on a Tom Thibodeau team that even have the freedom to shoot from other places. You think about the Knicks, it's basically just Brunson and Randall who are allowed to shoot those mid-range shots. Everybody else was shooting at the rim. They were shooting threes, or they were getting fouled. As far as me, still, I wouldn't say skeptical, but just not being sure. I just don't think that we've seen enough or seen anything to see that Thibodeau can do the ceiling-raising things that a championship team needs to do, and those are diversifying your rotations. You need to be able to go into the playoffs and take a punch and say, oh, well, we have a plan B. The thing that's very distinct about Tom Thibodeau teams is he finds the thing that he thinks his teams are best at, and he goes with it. So each year with the Knicks, all 4 seasons, there's kind of been like a story of the Knicks. Like, they've gotten off to slow starts, but it's kind of been Thibodeau feeling the teams out and figuring out what is this team's best look. And sometimes it requires a trade, sometimes it doesn't. But by the end of the season, you have a feel of what the best version of the Knicks looks like. But they haven't yet been ready to have an opponent look at them, game plan for them, say, okay, I know how to exploit this team's best weakness, and then adjust. They just try to do their best thing better. And I think it requires more versatility and more diversification than that from both a schematic and a rotation standpoint. That, to me, would be the biggest shortcoming or the biggest adjustment I think Tibbs needs to make to get them over the promised land. I'm not convinced that is a thing he's interested in. I hope that I'm wrong because, again, I think the Knicks are a championship team. And I think Thibodeau is clearly a brilliant basketball mind. So, like, it's possible I'm just wrong because he finds something that's so good he doesn't even need to change it up. Maybe he just finds an answer that's so high quality you don't need to diversify from it. That has yet to be seen. But that, I think, is how I would be wrong. I don't see Thibodeau coming into the season and being like, oh, how can I find all this versatility with this team? He just doesn't seem to be that type of coach. And for me, you look at all the championship coaches recently, all the championship teams, they've mostly had plan Bs, or the Celtics were a versatile team. They just weren't forced to use a plan B because everybody they played got hurt. So, I think the Knicks had to extend Thibodeau. I think there was no other choice. I think you take a guy like Tom Thibodeau and you don't extend him when he's due for an extension, and you send him into the last year of his contract extension, of his contract, you open up all sorts of avenues that maybe you don't want to open up with a team that you hope has championship expectations. I think Thibodeau is the first Knicks head coach to win playoff series in back-to-back seasons since Jeff Van Gundy. So you reward that guy. Who cares what someone like me thinks about him raising the ceiling? I think that's just standard practice, especially in a position where, let's be frank, if they have shortcomings this year, Dolan's not going to be afraid to eat that money and go get a new coach. That's something that happens in the NBA all the time. So I think by extending him, you put Thibodeau in the happiest place and you make him most likely to be his best self as a coach. And you give him a chance with this championship team to prove that he can be a championship coach. I don't think him not being the coach in the near future is all of a sudden out the window, but I think you just had to extend him.
Right. And, first off, those are all great points that you made, about Thibodeau and all that stuff. They're all valid points. But I think the thing with Thibodeau is there's a lot of misconceptions that come with him. You have, of course, the whole running the players into the ground thing that we've already briefly talked about, where people think that because of the Derrick Rose injury from 2012 that, oh, every time a player gets hurt under Thibodeau, it's because they played minutes when they shouldn't have. No, it's not. It's just not true. I mean, literally, like almost none of the Knicks injuries last year were attributed to playing time. The only one you could maybe attribute to playing time was OG's hamstring because he was playing a lot in that game too that he was going off in. But it happens. Everybody else, though, you can't attribute that to playing time. Mitchell Robinson didn't suffer a fracture in his ankle or his foot because of playing time. Julius Randle's shoulder didn't separate because of playing time. I know with that one, a lot of people were saying he shouldn't have been in the game, but there was 5 minutes left in the game. It was just starting to get away. The Heat still had their starters on the floor, for crying out loud. You can't point the finger at Thibodeau again because of that. They're freak accidents and they happen. And then aside from the minutes thing, there's also that misconception with the players poll that came out last year that said that, he was the coach they would least like to play for. I'll just tell you, everyone that voted on that poll for that part never played for Tibbs. Every time you hear a player talk about Tibbs, of course, the guys that play for him are going to say they love him. But I personally have never heard a bad thing about Tom Thibodeau from a player. I haven't. Every player you hear talk about Thibodeau, they say great things about him, that he really cares about his team. His practices aren't so, 4 hour long practices like everyone makes it sound like they are. They're not like anything crazy. It's a pretty standard practice situation. And, he's a player's coach. If you notice this Knicks team, all the players on the team are bought into him. They've bought into the product that he's building. They've bought into his coaching style. They're all Tibbs guys, if you will. I mean, they all play hard. They all have a winner's mentality. And I know Tom Thibodeau's career and his track record is a history of shortcomings. I know. But I think this is really the team that has the best chance that Thibodeau. I think you could even argue this is one of the best teams Thibodeau has coached. You have those Bulls teams from the early 2010s that were very good, but this comes next. I mean, it does. This is like the best team he's really had in a while. Even those Jimmy Butler Timberwolves, I wouldn't even say were as loaded in terms of star power as you have here. You have a lot more.
This is the best team he's ever coached. This is the best team he's ever coached.
That's what I'm saying. I wouldn't even put that behind me, to say that. So it's like, when you look at all those things, obviously there's the question of can Thibodeau be the guy to lead you to the championship and stuff. And I know he has to prove a little bit more than just a couple playoff series wins, which is a step in the right direction. I think it was good that you made the point that he's like one of the first, I think the first Knicks coach to win back-to-back playoff series since Jeff Van Gundy. I mean, the Knicks have a history of just awful head coaches, right? It was for most of the 2010s, it was just a revolving door of head coaches coming in and out. Left and right. Here's this guy, here's this guy, here's this guy. You had the Fizdale days and the Hornacek days and all that stuff. Now you actually have stability, though, at the head coach, and you have guys that fit his coaching style. You have the guys that fit that, that defensive mindset. The guys are playing hard on defense. They're laying their body out there. Even weaker defenders like Jalen Brunson leading the league in charges. That goes with, being coached by Thibodeau, who emphasizes defense. You may not be the most imposing defender, but you're laying your body out there still anyway and trying to make plays on that defensive side. And of course, you include Bridges and Anunoby, who are very good defensively, so their defense is sure to only get better under Thibodeau. And most importantly, too, though, Thibodeau, gets the most out of players that you don't expect. Isaiah Hartenstein does not get $87 million from the Thunder if he didn't play for the Knicks for 2 years under Thibodeau. He doesn't get that money. I mean, you could argue if Hartenstein did not work out with the Knicks, he might not even be in the league at the moment. I'm just saying, he had been on so many teams in so many years, just going in and out, that, guys like that, Thibodeau is the reason why these guys evolve. You could even say he's the reason Jalen Brunson evolved. Like, yeah, Jalen Brunson was already hitting an upwards trajectory before he signed, but it really took off when he came here, I think, largely because of the fact that he's being coached by Thibodeau. Like, I know it's not all that, but I think it plays a big part in that. you have an experienced head coach, a veteran head coach who, for the record, has a track record of coaching good teams. Like, yes, he's fallen short. I know I mentioned his, overall line is mostly shortcomings, falling short in the playoffs, all this stuff, but he's coached good teams. He's been to the playoffs several times, so he knows what it's like. I'm pretty sure he was an assistant coach on some of those finals teams from the 90s with the Knicks. So, he has the experience. I think he is the guy. I do. And I had a similar opinion to you where, you were very unsure if he was the guy. I had that opinion as little as a year and a half ago, when we still were playing guys like Evan Fournier in the rotation and stuff. I was questioning it all the time, though, whether he was the guy. Now, though, now that I see just how bought in everybody is, the mindsets that everyone's got and the way they've been playing under Thibodeau and seeing the rise and the involvement of players that I wouldn't have expected, under him, I think he can be the guy. I do. I think he's quickly, gone up the ladder quickly in terms of top head coaches in the league. I saw one list on Instagram from some post that didn't even have Thibodeau as a top 10 head coach, which I think is absolutely crazy. I think he's easily a top 10 coach in the NBA at the moment. I really do. I know there's some really good head coaches out there, but I think Thibodeau needs to get more flowers because, I don't know. I can't say any other coach would get the most out of his players the way Thibodeau does. I really can't say that. I mean, every player loves him. They love him. They love the way he coaches them, they love the way he, gets them going. And I know there's the whole, temper tantrums that Thibodeau has on the sidelines, and maybe they can be over the top and stuff. But you also want to be coached by a guy who cares. You want to be coached by a guy who cares about the way his team is performing out there, even if it's something as simple as a missed assignment on defense or a bad shot. You want a coach that cares about every single play the way that he does. So, bottom line, without rambling too much about him, I think he can be the guy. Obviously, there's still a lot he needs to prove, but I think that the extension he got in the offseason was easily deserved. I think it was, as Geoff said, you had to do it. He's the most successful coach they've had really in all of the 2000s at this point. So, you had to do it. I think he's the guy, and we'll just see what happens. But I personally think that Thibodeau is the right person to do it. I think he can lead this team to where it needs to be. It might take some time, but I think he can do it.
Barring like unforeseen circumstance for this season, like terribly disappoints, I have grown to think that Tom Thibodeau is the guy. When the Knicks hired him, I was very high on him, and I thought he was like the best option out there. There's obviously him, Kenny Atkinson, Jason Kidd, who is now hired by the Mavericks. Just looking at all those different like options, he was the best guy. And 2021, he was good. He led the Knicks to the playoffs. Fourth seed, Julius Randle. I wanted him gone after his second year. I was like, I'm done with this coach. Third year, I was like, okay, he coached a good season, but how high of a ceiling can he get this team to, especially with Julius Randle, that bit of relationship. And last year did it for me where it's like, okay, he's starting to grow on me. He's evolving. Obviously he's not the hard coach that everybody says he is. I never believed any of that crap. He obviously the players relate to him as well. It's funny because they even brought him on Roommate's show as well. But the important thing is here, he's built a winning culture. The players take on his mental toughness attitude. To me, it's the two T's with him. It's the teamwork and the toughness that the Knicks have built in with this organization because of Tom Thibodeau. And I've never been more grateful to have him as head coach. Obviously, this is going to be, as Geoff said, this is the most talented team he's ever had. I think Towns obviously is probably the best center he's had offensively. Obviously, Joakim Noah doesn't compare and all that. But there's so many different aspects, and I think that the pressure, just because he signed the 3-year extension, I still think there's a lot of pressure on him to win. Doesn't mean he's going to get fired. Doesn't mean he's not going to get fired. But ultimately, I think at the end of the day, I've grown more of a belief that he's going to lead this to the promised land. So for the final segment here, this is not really rapid fire, but it's a quick one. We'll do ideal rotation for the start of the season. You could say 8 to 9. Who do you want to play? And then I'll ask, where do you guys rank in the Eastern? Where do you guys rank the Knicks in the Eastern Conference? And then win projected total. So I'll start off with Geoff.
So just to be clear, are we assuming Precious is out? Like, do you want me to build a rotation with Precious out?
Yeah.
So I would
We'll start with
I
right
would
now.
start Brunson, Deuce, McCall, OG, and Towns. I would bring to start the season until Precious came back. I would go with both Kolek and Payne with Josh Hart and one of the centers, whether that's Sims or I would trust Tibbs, whoever he thought was more helpful right now between Huckporty and Sims. But I would do a 9-man rotation with Payne, Kolek, Hart, and one of the centers off the bench. I would play the centers not a ton. I would play them, 10 to 13 minutes a night and have Towns just in the meantime play 35 minutes and push him a little harder until Precious came back. And then that's when I would alleviate his role. I think if the Knicks do this and Hart is the one getting the wing minutes off the bench, and that is just the wing rotation between Hart, Bridges, and OG, and they're playing the majority of the wing minutes, and you have Brunson, Mikal Bridges, Deuce, and the two guards getting the guard minutes, I think this team, with any reasonable injury luck, is their ceiling is the 1 seed. I think they're a top 2 seed a huge percentage of the time, depending on how seriously Boston takes the regular season. And I think they win anywhere between 55 and 60 games if they run this rotation. I feel very strongly about this. I think they don't have to get off to a slow start. I think you bring Hart off the bench and you set yourself, you're in a position where this is the best rotation and you're already close to your ceiling as a team. Yes, it's going to be nice when Precious Achiuwa comes back because he's a better backup 5 than Sims or Huckporty is. Yes, it would be nice if Landry Shamet didn't have that injury because he was a wing who could shoot really well and you had more lineup diversification. But with Hart being the Swiss Army knife he is off the bench and getting to use him in all of his little roles and maximizing him while still maximizing all the guys in the starting lineup, this is a 60-win ceiling team that I think can be the 1 seed in the playoffs. So, yeah, I think that's how high they can go if they go with that starting lineup.
I wanted to add real quick before you go, Dylan. I remember, Geoff, I think it was you that said it on Hot Hand Theory that the Knicks lineup with Deuce, Brunson, Anunoby, Bridges, and Towns has the potential to be the best lineup in the NBA in terms of
I think it would be the best starting lineup in the NBA. XJ is the more rational one. I tend to, sometimes have Knicks goggles on, and he was like, let's just stick with offensive rating because we don't know how the thing about the defense is, though, even with Brunson and Towns, bookending 1 and 5 against most teams with Deuce, Bridges, and OG at the point of attack, you're not going to be able to exploit Brunson and Towns that well. I think that defense, it might not be the best defense in the NBA, but I think it'd be a very good defense. And yeah, I think that would be one of, if not the best starting 5 units. It's a perfect synergy lineup. Like it's so good. You have 5 guys who can shoot. Again, assuming Bridges can shoot, you have 5 shooters. Hart's not a shooter. If you have 3 really good defenders, you're maximizing Brunson and Towns because that's going to be the main action you run. You're going to run that Brunson Towns pick and roll. You have everything in that lineup. And then you're also getting a better bench lineup because the bench unit now has Hart on the wing instead of forcing in a bit. I feel so strongly that this is the best version of the Knicks because you have arguably a better starting lineup, a more synergistic starting lineup. But even if you think the stuff Hart does, the rebounding, the pushing of the pace, let's say you do think that's so valuable it makes up for the other things Deuce does better, and you prefer Hart in the net trade-off in the starting lineup, I think even still, you're still winning the overall net trade-off because the bench is so much better with Hart off it at the wing than playing 2 of these backup bigs together. I can't stress enough, if Hart is in the starting lineup and they don't majorly stagger, this bench unit without Precious is going to be a disaster. And that is just going to create a domino effect because Tibbs isn't going to play this disastrous bench lineup for 10, 15 minutes a night. He's just not going to sit there and watch this bad bench lineup get killed by opponents. He's not going to do it. He's going to go back to the starters, and there you go. That first domino falls down. The starters are playing too many minutes. I think you get Deuce in that starting lineup. You get a bench unit you're more comfortable with. All of a sudden, you have 2 units you're comfortable with. The minutes don't get crazy, and the team on the net is just better. I feel very strongly about this.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to Hart, I have such I'm debating with my opinion on it because before Precious went down and stuff like that, and before Shamet went down, I had been saying that Hart in the starting five was fine because, yes, I know he wasn't really scoring. I know he wasn't really doing much offensively, but as you alluded to, all the little things, he's a good off ball defender, great playmaker, great rebounder. He pushes pace, he gives them tempo. He really gets the energy out of the other guys in the starting five. So, I think I still think that's what's going to end up being the starting five tomorrow night. I mean, who knows? Maybe Thibodeau does make the change and puts Deuce in there, given the injury situation with Precious. But I think we know he's kind of stubborn when it comes to his lineups, so I think he's going to be pretty set on having Hart try to just form some chemistry with the starting five. But you know. I also see why it can be a benefit to have him come off the bench with this recent injury stuff. You don't have a lot of wing depth now anymore in the second unit. You already didn't have a lot to begin with, but now you really don't have any, right? So if you want to have Hart come off the bench, I mean, yeah, it does make sense from a rotational standpoint. I get the notion too, though, of them wanting to be able to play their best five players on the floor at all times, or most of the time, I should say, with the starting five. So, and in terms of matchups as well, like with Boston and stuff like that. So I get it, but I think too, you made good points about the offense. The offense will look a lot better if you have Deuce in there, and you can also get an opportunity to get Kolek into the rotation, which would be pretty difficult to do if you kept starting Hart, because then you would essentially have three guards coming off the bench if you threw in Kolek with Payne and McBride. So I understand that there's pros and cons to it, because I think if you take Hart out of the starting five, you're losing that other impact areas, aside from the scoring and stuff with the starting five, which is a downside, but of course at the same time you'll probably have him close games anyway, so maybe it's not the worst thing in the world, but also
Dylan, if you don't mind me just 1 second popping in
go,
there,
go.
that's another point that you just made that's really good, and in my opinion goes with my plan. If Hart starts, we're not going to see the Deuce with the starters lineup. We're not
Yeah.
even going to get a sample size for it. In the preseason, Deuce McBride played 0 minutes with the starters minus Josh Hart. 0. If Deuce starts, to Dylan's point that he just said, Hart will still close with the starters. You'll get a full sample size of both lineups, and by the end of the season, you'll have somewhat of a feel of which lineup is better. You'll play your two best lineups over a giant sample size of minutes, and you'll be able to look at the data and say, well, here's how one performed, here's how another performed. Yeah, we're going to trust the one that performed better. If Hart starts this entire season, unless there's an injury to somebody, Hart, I guess, Deuce is going to play less than 50 minutes with the starters, and they're not even going to get to see if this stuff all goes into approximating and approaching the ceiling of a team. You look at a team like the Celtics, a team like the Thunder, Missoula and Daignault, they're throwing shit at the wall and seeing what sticks. You gotta see what lineups are your best lineup. You have to put them out there sometimes. And I just feel like if Hart, that's another point. I'm sorry that I cut you off
No,
and
don't
hopped
worry
in,
about it,
but
man.
if Hart starts, this lineup is going to play the majority of
Yeah.
minutes, and they're going to get no versatility. It just goes out the window.
Yeah, I mean, it's just true. Because I mean, like I said, I've been debating with it myself pretty much all preseason, because it was a hot topic of discussion of whether or not Hart should be starting or Deuce should be starting. It's been kind of a split debate. I've noticed from some people. I know a lot more people recently have been leaning more towards Deuce starting, which it's valid given the situation with the rotation overall and the depth in the wing department. You want to be able to keep your depth as best as you can, and also, as you said, because Hart will provide all the little things in the bench unit, which is important there too. It won't be just, you're relying on your guards to do all the scoring and Precious to kind of just hold down the fort a little bit. You'll have Hart doing all the little things as well in the bench unit. Again, I still think he's going to end up starting tomorrow night. I do. I fully am convinced of that. I don't think Tom Thibodeau is going to make the change on opening night, considering he never ran that lineup in the preseason. I don't think he's going to do it. I just don't see it realistically. From a personal standpoint, I'm still like kind of undecided on how I feel about it, because while I do want to see Hart score the basketball a little bit more, I do think the little things are important, just given the fact that you do have four guys already that can score at least 20 a game and have proven to do it. So the scoring from Hart is not going to be like the biggest thing you're looking for. We're not looking for him to score. We're looking for him to do everything else. But it also goes back to my point from earlier where I said you want Hart to be somewhat of a threat offensively, so the attention is taken away from the other guys on the floor. It's a complicated situation. It is. And I think what's most important too is how Hart feels about it. He came out the other day and said that he's confused about his role. He doesn't even know what it's supposed to be. He's like unsure of where he fits in the starting five because of the lack of scoring. As I said earlier, he scored 2 total points in the preseason, and I think he took like a total of like 6 shots, which again, a decrease in shot volume and scoring was to be expected, and I'm sure he expected that too. And he acknowledged that it's a sacrifice he has to make. But he's also questioning his role a little bit and wondering if going off the bench is better for him. And it might be. It might be. It might give him more opportunities to score while also still being able to provide all the little things. And then back to the closing point that I mentioned before, he's going to be closing games anyway, regardless of whether he's starting or coming off the bench. Like, I don't think that was ever going to change. He was always going to be in that closing lineup with Brunson, Towns, Bridges, Anunoby, you name it. He was gonna always do that. That was always gonna be a thing. And maybe that could be a reason why Thibodeau feels like he needs to be in the starting five, because if he's gonna be starting with these guys or closing games with these guys, I should be saying, then he needs to be able to start with them and kind of have that chemistry, built with those guys so that when he is closing games with them, he's got the best impact you can possibly have out of him. Now, again, I know it's a tough situation. It's one of the biggest questions that I'm pretty sure is going to linger for a few weeks now, because like I said, I don't think Thibodeau is going to make the change tomorrow night. I think it's going to end up being something that he would do a couple weeks from now if it comes to be that. Maybe I'm wrong and he ends up starting Deuce tomorrow night, and I'll be pleasantly surprised that he's willing to shake things up a little bit, try to get the spark a little bit. But I don't think the Knicks played bad enough to where you can justify doing that right away either, because they did good in the preseason. They did. They almost went undefeated in the preseason. And of course, it's different rotations in the preseason. I get that. But it's not like the starting five was bad. Like, yeah, Bridges and Towns struggled, but Brunson still flourished and Anunoby still flourished, and Hart still did all the little things you're asking out of him. So, they did their job. They did the right stuff. It's just a matter of, again, what you said, the ceiling of the team, which I'm about to get to for this season. They definitely can, I think they're undoubtedly a top 2 team in the Eastern Conference. I think it's literally them and the Celtics at this point. The 76ers are like the third guy right behind them. I don't think the Knicks, I don't think the Sixers are better than the Knicks though. I know there's been that whole debate of, oh, Maxey, Embiid, and George, we're the big 3, we're way better. No, the Sixers are not better than the Knicks. I don't think so. At least on paper, I don't think so. I think the Knicks have the better team all around when you just look at things from a roster standpoint. So I think it's the Knicks and the Celtics at this point for that top spot in the East. Their ceiling, I agree with Geoff. It's the 1 seed. That's their ceiling. I think realistically, though, they're going to finish second. I think Boston's they're going to have another good season. And in terms of like playoff finish and stuff, I expect to make the Eastern Conference Finals. I do. I expect to get there. Like, obviously the expectations were different last year. Last year was, okay, can we at least just have another successful season? And then, we kind of raised the expectations a little bit after the trade and said, oh, we can make the Eastern Conference Finals with this team. I think now the expectation is at the bare minimum to make the Eastern Conference Finals. Like like if the Knicks made the Eastern Conference Finals, I don't think that would be a surprise. I think that would be, well, they should be here. You know what I mean? It would be one of those things. And in terms of win total, I think they're going to surpass their win total from last year. 50 wins last season was something I boldly predicted was going to happen, but it's a bold prediction for a reason. I wasn't fully convinced that it was going to happen. I thought maybe like 47, 48 was pretty realistic. I wasn't so certain about 50, but I also wasn't like 0% certain it wasn't going to happen. This year, though, I think they're easily going to get 50 wins. I think they might even crack 55. So that'll be interesting to see. I think they can really, again, the sky's the limit with this team, because they're capable of once again being a top 5 offense or top 10 offense, and a top 10 defense. I think they were one of like 3 or 4 teams last year that did that were, top 10 in offense and defensive rating. I think they can do that again. I think really they are capable of being top teams on both ends of the floor. I think really they can be a top 3 offense too. I think they might even be the number 1 offense, to be honest. If you get the most out of those guys that are in the starting 5, you get another fantastic season from Brunson. You get a great season from Towns, Bridges, Anunoby contributing as well. You can be the number 1 offense. You really can. The spacing is going to be ridiculous. It's going to be amazing. As long as all those guys are clicking, the spacing is going to be out of this world. They really can be the number 1 offense in the NBA, and they can be a top 5 defense too. And I know that's a lot to ask for, to be insanely elite on both ends of the floor. And I agree that you don't necessarily have to be insanely elite on both ends of the floor to be successful. But I do think, you got to be able to at least be at the bare minimum above average on both sides. And I do think the Knicks are going to be more than above average on both sides. I think they can be amazing offensively and very good defensively, or even vice versa. They can be great, amazing defensively and very good offensively. They really have they're so versatile in so many different ways that they can really get really anywhere they want. It's all in their control. They have the roster to do anything really. So yeah, that's all I got to say about that.
Yeah, I'll keep it short and sweet. I like Jeff's rotation in terms of tomorrow, and I'm going to go off of Dylan's point as well. I wouldn't be surprised if Josh Hart starts, but I do think for the better ceiling, just to start the season better in terms of better spacing as well. I personally would have Deuce McBride in the starting lineup at the 2. You have Brunson at the 1, Bridges at the 3. You have OG at the 4, Towns at the 5. Then you have Josh Hart and Kolek running it off the bench along with Campaign, who could provide some scoring and a pinch as well. And then you have one of the centers now. I don't think they'll go to Huck Porty early. I think they probably have Jericho Sims in there. I'm not too high on Jericho Sims. I think he's got good size. I think he's athletic. He's a good rebounder. But I think there are times where he bites too much on
You
pump
and me
fakes, but
both,
that
bro.
happens to a
You
lot
and
of
me
the Knicks
both.
sometimes. But yeah, but in terms of the Knicks, this is probably the best roster I've seen them have as a basketball fan. I'm projecting them at 55 wins. I think they finish as the second seed. I wouldn't be surprised if the Knicks finish in front of the Celtics in terms of playoff run. Like if the Celtics get eliminated in the second round and the Knicks move further and that yada, yada, yada. But regardless, my final prediction is 55 wins. They can max out to 60, I think. I'm going to go second seed, Eastern Conference Finals at the bare minimum, as Dylan said. But to finally wrap things up, it's about an hour 40 at least. So I'll start off with Geoff, Dylan, and then myself for final thoughts.
My final thought, honestly, we kind of ran the gambit here. I just want to say thanks for having me on. To all the Knicks fans listening, if you like basketball content, just come check us out at Hot Hand Theory. I don't know if you know Strickland. I write for Strickland. I actually have a weekly column coming out for Strickland called 5 Things with Frank. My name's Geoff, but my Twitter handle is Frank Barrett. So I'll be writing about the Knicks at least once a week for the entire season. First edition should come out tomorrow. Yeah, I'm just really excited for this Knicks season and this NBA season. This is a really, really great time to be a basketball fan, and really appreciative to you, Luca, for having me on. So thanks to you.
Yeah, yeah, and
Dylan.
I mean, same thing that Geoff said. I obviously gave all of our thoughts to what the Knicks are going to do this year, so I won't be redundant and say it all again. I'll just say where you can find all my stuff. You can find me on my Twitter. It's literally just my name, Dylan Backer. It's Dylan Backer ESM is the handle, but if you just type in my name, you'll find it. And you can follow Fireside Knicks on YouTube. We're really starting to relaunch that a little bit and really get that going. We're going to be pumping out a lot of Knicks content on there this year. We've been doing a lot on the social media front and the YouTube Shorts front, but we're really going to get going with some YouTube videos like this kind of format where we're discussing some really important topics with the Knicks. So be sure to subscribe to that channel and follow us on all the social media platforms. We're literally on every social media platform you can imagine, so you can just find us over there at Fireside Knicks. And you can also check out my articles at empiresportsmedia.com. I don't just write about the Knicks. If there are any Giants and Yankees fans in here as well, I also cover them pretty frequently. I'm primarily covering the Knicks, but I also do cover those teams as well. So if you want to check that out, you can also check that stuff out. And yeah, I don't really have much else to say other than thank you for having me on here again, Luca. We've been doing a lot of streams lately, and it's been really fun. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. This was the official first live stream that wasn't a basketball play-by-play because we did the Pacers series last year with a couple of other guys, and obviously the Sixers series as well. But this was a fun basketball conversation. As they thanked me, I like to thank Dylan for coming on. I like to thank Geoff for coming on. He and XJ, as I have posted everybody's link here. X, you have Dylan, you have where he's at. You also have Fireside Knicks. You also have Geoff and his Frank Barrett Twitter account. As he said, I will also post the Strickland link because he writes for them. They're great in terms of their podcasting and their articles. They put out great content. And Fireside Knicks and Hot Hand Theory on YouTube. You guys do all a great job. But in terms of this, it was a great basketball conversation. Tomorrow we should be live for Knicks Celtics 7:30 season opener. Celtics will be receiving their championship rings, and let's see if our New York Knicks can spoil them. But more importantly, folks, if you haven't already, hit that like button, subscribe. We are 28 away from 100. Turn on that notification bell so you know when I go live or I drop a video. Plenty of more basketball content this season and more consistent content at that, as well as share this out, folks. Share this to your Knicks friends and family. Without further ado, folks, we'll bid you good night. See you tomorrow for Knicks Celtics.